Hi, this is Zach with Worn&Wound. Today we're taking a look at the C9 Harrison 5-day automatic. This watch was very exciting when they announced it last year because of the movement inside of it, the SH21. This is Christopher Ward's first in-house movement, and it's a very large achievement for the brand. If you've been following along with us in the last couple of years, you know we've reviewed many Christopher Ward watches, particularly the ones with interesting in-house modules that they've designed. They've teamed up with a watchmaker named Johann Ziank, who's fairly young, who's worked with the brand to develop a handful of cool modules. They made a jump hour, they made a mono pusher chronograph, they made a world timer, just a lot of really cool things, all of which we've reviewed on the site. But the fact that it was leading to this, to a true full in-house movement, was really exciting and quite surprising because it's just a very massive leap forward. As many of you know, I mean, for a brand, few brands make in-house watch movements or make them themselves, or manufacturers, and even fewer do so at affordable prices. Really only a handful of brands come to mind. So naturally, when Christopher Ward did it, they stuck to their core values of being an affordable brand and brought you a 5-day automatic chronometer in a watch that costs $2,075, which is just totally unheard of. I mean, it's frankly, it's Christopher Ward being kind of like disruptive in the industry, if you will, which they've always kind of been with their business model and keeping prices low, yet making Swiss-made watches with automatic movements. So this one really was striking. I mean, typically your watches are going to only have 40 hours of power reserve. This has a full 5 days, which the next kind of closest watches that do that with in-house movements are really several $1,000s. So as far as value goes, this one offers a ton of it. And then this first watch that they put it in, very classic looking kind of dress watch. It is on the large side, which I know is a bit contentious for a lot of people, but they used it as a showcase for this movement to bring it out there, and it's, you know, keep it with the aesthetic of their C9 Harrison line, which is definitely more of a traditional, formal aesthetic to it, though one that is quite handsome in my opinion. So yeah, let's take a closer look. The case of the C9 Harrison 5-day automatic is more or less the same as ones on other C9 watches we have seen, namely the mono pusher chronograph. It's a large case measuring 43 millimeters in diameter, about 51 millimeters lug to lug, and about 14 millimeters tall to the top of the sapphire crystal here. So that does make it a sizable watch. I mean, say 40 millimeters to 42 is, you're kind of medium, and when you're above that, you're definitely pushing in large. And it's especially large for a watch that is more formal or dress in style. I think a lot of people, take issue with the size of this watch because it does come across more as a dress watch. But, I think it's just a fact you accept, and then you move on and you kind of contextualize this watch in another way. And I think, when you look at it and also think about this fact that this is a watch that is meant to convey the movement inside, I'd put it more along the lines of, if you look at these larger, kind of luxury watches like the IWC Portuguese watches, which are going up to like 45 millimeters, yet still are extremely formal watches, it's in line with those, which is to say kind of a large size formal masculine watch, not necessarily a dress watch so much as like just a handsome large size watch. And in those regards, I think it's actually very well proportioned, and it's certainly an attractive watch. And the case itself is very well manufactured, as we've seen with these cases before. It's a cylinder with fairly straight lugs. They do contour a little bit, polished on the top surface. Looking at the side now, you have really crisp, sharp lines from very nice finishing going along the edge of the lugs here. That is a very nice line. You get no rounding out there whatsoever. Very nice, clean, horizontal brushing then across the side, giving you that nice mix of finishing there. So, it has, the qualities you want to see in a kind of a nicer, more formal watch. And at a watch at $2,000, obviously it should also be well finished, which this certainly is. Flipping the watch over now, you see the other reason for the large size is because this movement is indeed very large, and they give you a nice big view of the SH21, which we'll talk about more in detail later. But you can see everything here: the rotor, the barrels, the balance, and then the actual text here is just pushed to the outer edge and kept very minimal. You do have a number here for the series number. This one is a sample, so it's 000, and then just the caliber SH21 there. So just keeping it really clean, keeping the focus on the movement. Looking now at the dial of the C9 Harrison 5-day automatic, it's in the same style as all of the Harrison watches, particularly the mono pusher, chronograph, and the big date day. I mean, they have the same language of a similar case. It's clearly one aesthetic lineup. And for the Christopher Ward line, I happen to say I think it's my favorite of what they do. It feels perhaps the most unique to them, even though it's a very simple, subtle design. I like that it's clean. It's just about space, proportioning, and has a nice mid-century feeling without feeling too much like they're trying to make a throwback watch or vintage watch. It doesn't feel like that, but there is something kind of 50s, 60s about it as well, which just works towards having like a little bit more style than you might expect. So yeah, now looking in here, you can get this in 3 different colors. There's obviously white, there is a dark gray, and a blue. The white is a matte white surface on which there is applied silver batons. There's a Roman numeral 12 and a Roman numeral 6. I really like the execution here. There's just a long, thin typeface. I think it works really well with the batons. It's an attractive look, and it just adds some weight to 12 and 6, as well as kind of plays with the symmetry of everything. At 3, you have a date window here. Obviously, it's a custom movement, in-house movement, so it's going to have their own date disc there. It's black text on a white. Works fine. I wonder maybe if they could have played with that typeface a little bit more to work with these elongated numerals, but it doesn't bother me either. Looking then on the dial itself, you have Christopher Ward logo below 12, and then you have 5-day automatic chronometer above 6. This might look like a lot of text for kind of a more formal dress watch, but I think this is extremely important text. 5-day automatic chronometer is a very special thing, and something that this watch should flaunt, because in every other way it's actually really a subtle kind of modest design, and that's really its most special feature. So I'm happy to see it kind of shown there. The hands on this dial are often met with some dismay from people, but I'll just say outright that I do like them. So there are these long, kind of spiny hands. They taper on both sides. They look like they'd actually be sharp to touch. They have long counterweights on both sides. And what the issue is, it's pretty obvious, I think, when you look at them, is that they're all very similar. The hour and the minute hand are both in blue steel. The second hand is in polished steel, but because of the size and the shape, they are all very similar. Now, I'd say, though, in actuality, in using this watch and wearing it for a little while, they are totally different from one another, enough so that I didn't actually have any issues when reading it. I mean, the hour hand is shorter. It's shorter than the minute hand, and it points to the hour exactly. The minute hand points to the minutes on the outer edge here. And then the second hand, I guess you could mix that up with the hour hand at a split-second glance, but it's in constant motion, so it very quickly is obvious that it is not the minute hand. So in the long run, I mean, when you're looking at this, it's totally easy to read. But what I really like about these hands, other than the fact that they're unique, and I think that they work with the aesthetic of this watch, is that, typically when you look at hands, you look at them individually, and they kind of each have their own shape and form. Here, as a unit, as 3 hands that are coming together, they're really quite beautiful, creating this kind of starburst shape in the middle of the dial. And I can't think of another watch where the hands kind of come together and create kind of a second form. So that's really cool, and I think that really adds to the overall look of the watch. So the star of this watch is really the movement, the SH21. Now, refer to this as an in-house movement, and I believe that to be true, but just to clarify, as the word in-house is kind of a lot of connotations and can create a lot of issues, Christopher Ward brand is not like hand-making these in London in their offices. They are partnered with a Swiss company called, and I'm going to butcher this because I don't speak French, Synergies or Logeries, and they are manufacturing these movements for them. These are designed by Johannes Jonk, and they are at first released under the Christopher Ward brand name, and they are, as far as these things go, an in-house movement. But Christopher Ward has been very transparent about this. They partnered with a Swiss manufacturer, so they are kind of they are one brand, but they are 2 separate entities. And these pieces are not, like in the traditional sense of like a single guy hand making everything. In order for this to be made, in order for this to be, affordable, they made some parts, in-house. They contracted some parts. I mean, this is a very modern concept of an in-house movement in the sense that it's their design, it's their movement, but, they had to manufacture in certain ways. to meet the price point of $2,075, which is extremely low for what this movement is. Now, I would almost call this, often in-house movements are proprietary in the sense that only that brand uses them, but we've already seen this movement, even though it's not quite clearly labeled as such, in a Meistersinger watch. And Meistersinger has some other watches that clearly use Christopher Ward, or uses the same movement. So I assume that they're all kind of partners with the same Swiss manufacturer. And that, is interesting. I think it's just great that they're creating this little world in which they have access to these cool movements that other brands don't yet. They're not relying on ETA for all of their movements, and they're at the same time not raising their prices up to the $10,000 price point to do this. So with all that said, now we can take a look at the SH21. And the name of it, what's going on here is so fantastic. So it's a 5-day movement. That means that it has 2 barrels, which you can see clearly here. And those are both storing energy that is translated from the rotor when you're moving the watch or hand wound to give it a full 120 hours of power reserve, which is phenomenal. I mean, there are a lot of different things, you can do, you can find in a movement, but having a lot of power is very practical. So when you take this watch off, maybe you take it off for a day, maybe you take it off for 2-3 days, you can come back to it and it'll still be running, it'll still be keeping the time. And that's just extremely cool, and it's really unheard of in this price point. The next thing is that it's a chronometer. So it is COSC approved. That means it's 99% accurate. And I might get these numbers wrong. It's plus minus 4-6 seconds a day. So still worse than a quartz, but still extremely good for mechanical movement. So those two things combined, really only seen in watches that say, 8-10 grand and up. Then looking at the movement here, it's an interesting movement. It doesn't look quite like anything else. I think some people compared it to the Valjoux 7750 in looks, and I think that's because of the size of it, and because they've built it in this kind of modular way so that they can use it and they can basically build on top of this and create a movement that they can get a lot of life out of. So they can put GMTs on here, they can make it manual wind, they can really use this as like the core of a whole series of watches that they will be developing. So with the movement itself, it's a 31 joule movement, 5-day power reserve, as I said, 28,800 beats per hour, so nice smooth sweeping second hand, manually winding, and hacking seconds here. Just all around so exceptionally cool. Now looking in even further, you'll see the rotor here and the movement are all kind of plain looking, and at a glance this might seem like it's undecorated, but Christopher Ward, they actually were very intentional with what they did here, and it's just flat sanded. Now that might seem almost boring, and I think there is some rebuke to this, but there is a concept here, which is that the flat sanding is actually, as though it seems simple, almost more, not complicated, but more suggestive of kind of like a high-end movement, because as I've heard from other watchmakers, things like Cote de Genève and things like perlage can actually be used to grain out scratches or things that end up in the movement. And I'm not saying that high-end movements are doing that because that is what perlage does, because they're just classical forms of technique. But in doing this flat sanding, they've kind of made a statement that their production is really good, that they're keeping it really clean, and that they're going with this classical and I think almost more British style of decorating. It might lack the oomph and the wow factor of perlage and Cote de Genève, but just make no mistake that this is not an undecorated movement. It's just very carefully flat sanded. The screws are all flat polished on top. It's just a different style. And Christopher Ward, like I said, they're doing things differently, and they wanted to kind of make a point with that. One last cool feature to mention here is that the rotor is actually made out of solid rhodium, giving it a lot of mass, so it's very efficient for winding. And that's also just not a detail you're going to see very often. Looking at the C9 Harrison 5-day automatic on the wrist, you can see, like I said, it's a large watch. 43 millimeters is large for a dress or formal watch, but I think it's in its own way, looking at this as its own unique object, is very well sized and proportioned for a larger size watch. And like, I'm personally a person who wears smaller watches. A lot of my watches are in the 38 to 36 millimeter range, but strapping this on, I think it fits very nicely on my 7-inch wrist, and I think it has a really solid, handsome look. It's reserved. It is formal enough to be this kind of watch. I feel like I would definitely, I'd feel comfortable wearing this to an office, to a formal event for sure, even though it's not in classical dress proportions. So yeah, I mean, it's just very clean and very reserved. The thing with this watch that's so funny is that, like, I'm so obsessed with the movement that I almost like forget, well, there's this whole watch around it, and the watch around it is very attractive, and regardless of the movement in it, I think it is a nice watch. And there are other watches in this line that are very similar looking, so you can get the aesthetic without necessarily going all out for this movement, namely in their big date day watch, which is very similar. But yeah, I think it looks really good. You might have trouble if you're with smaller wrists, but if you have larger wrists, this is certainly a watch that's going to fit even, I think nicer. The 51 millimeter lug to lug, I think in particular makes this comfortable because that isn't too long, and it is well proportioned. So you do have this nice, just, masculinity from it. Looking now at the strap, it's a 22 millimeter lugs here, and they have it on a genuine Louisiana Gator strap in blue. I think it's a really nice choice with the watch. It gives it almost a bit of a nautical feel. I think, honestly, I'm surprised I didn't say this before, but this most reminds me of wearing a classic like marine chronometer watch, and it has the same kind of aesthetic feeling as that, in the sense that they're large, they're formal, but there is like a rugged everydayness to them. So yeah, I mean, that's definitely what I would compare it to. And the blue here brings that out. It works with the blue steel. It gives a nice cool, crisp feeling with the white. Definitely a bit formal feeling, but I think, obviously the strap here, you could put a brown strap on for something a little more loose, and you could change the material. I think a suede would look actually really cool on this watch as well. It's a beautifully made strap. I really love Christopher Ward's Gator straps. They're very thin, but they're very, thin in the right way. They're thick by the lugs, and then very thin by the time you get to the buckle, so they're very comfortable. They wear very nicely. And then you have their Bader deployant clasp, which is, I think, the nicest deployant clasp we've seen. They work in this very nice way where one side kind of plugs in, and then they close with just swinging over. So you have no tail coming up. You don't really have... There is metal going around here, but sometimes with deployant clasps you have metal going up the side of your wrist, which I find very uncomfortable, and the mechanism itself is nice. So, all around, it's a great strap for this watch aesthetically, and, as part of a $2,000 package, I think it's a very high quality addition. To wrap up, the Christopher Ward C9 Harrison 5-day automatic is a very cool watch, namely for the movement inside the SH21. I mean, that's really the exceptional feature of this watch that not just makes it stand out amongst Christopher Ward's other watches, but makes it stand out amongst the industry as a whole. Nobody is doing a 5-day automatic chronometer at $2,000. It's unheard of. I mean, there was actually a great quote from Mike France when they first unveiled the movement that more or less says that another industry leader said, who gives you the right to do that? And it's like, well, that's the attitude. It's like, if other people are doing it at a high price, then you can't do it at a high price. But Christopher Ward, that's not their business model, and they're not for the person who necessarily only wants to pay a high price for something fancy, something with real horological chops. And that's really what you're talking about here. You're talking about a lot of money invested, a lot of time, a lot of research, and some very cool manufacturing techniques to do such at a lower cost. And I don't think I could think of a better example of what I'd like to see in the kind of more affordable watch range than brands working towards this kind of conclusion. Making their own watch movements, making really pushing it, and doing so at a price point it's a great price point too. Like, I think $2,000, because honestly there's a lot going on here. Clearly, there's a lot of value. It's a watch that you should really want if you're going to get it. Because that $2,000 price, there's a lot of other options out there, obviously, especially in vintage. But this watch really stands out, in the modern watch. But it's not something that you should be buying frivolously either. You should really be into what it does to want to pay more for it. And we've already seen just this last week that Christopher Ward's going to be using this movement in other watches. They put it in their limited edition version of the new their new version of the Trident. So it's a 600-meter dive watch, same price as this, but it has a 5-day automatic chronometer. And I mean, that's potentially even cooler. I mean, it's a perfect use of this movement is a dive watch. So, that's fantastic as well. So yeah, to wrap up, I'm a really big fan of the movement. And then like I said, I like the watch too. I know the watch isn't for everyone because of the size, but I happen to think it wears very well. I happen to think it's handsome. It's a very kind of safe watch in its own way, but has enough little pieces of kind of flair and style and kind of, good finishing, and just all these little things that just make it a very enjoyable watch to wear. So yeah, please read the full review on Worn and Wound. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you.